Right, welcome back to Kidder Street Noise, and we are delighted to be joined by Daniel Clough. Is it Dan or Daniel?
Dan.
Definitely Dan. Yeah.
It's Dan, yeah. I was Chris and Daniel, but no one ever called me that. Unless I'm in trouble.
So Dan is the writer of the Simon Garner new book, One Last Shot, which is currently, Richard just told us that it's in printing, ready to be released middle of December. Is that when we're looking at for the people that pre-ordered? And we were also joined by the publisher, Richard Slater, who also wrote and published the first book. There's only one Simon Garner.
I wrote the first book with Simon. We had a publisher called Parswood who published that first book.
All right, I see. So, I don't want to get straight into the book. Obviously, we spoke a little bit before we started recording and all that lot. I want to get to know about you first. So, Dan, I feel like, just going off the interactions I've had on Twitter, we're from like a similar generation of Rovers fan. So I've got a couple of questions to ask you to get to almost gather what you grew up through, what like your opinions are on football and stuff. So I'm going to start with your earliest memory as a football fan.
So I was born January 1987, so 2 months before we won the Full Members Cup. Never saw Simon Garner play, which is sad really, but has made this whole process quite a positive experience. My first memories of football are the title-winning season, and I went to the Charity Shield that season, 1994, when we played Man United, which it's not my most happy memory, not just because we lost, but because my mum's husband at the time was a Man United fan and was a season ticket holder, and I think as a 8-year-old, whatever I was at the time, didn't necessarily realise how into Rovers I'd become. So bought tickets for himself, my mum and myself, and me in the United end. And then his heart dropped when I came bounding down the steps in full kit, blue and white. And then they didn't have the heart to get me to change. They went to the match. My mum bought me a bloody flag. So I sat in, and I'm 6'2", and I was always tall, so I always appeared older than I was, which came in handy when I was, in my mid-teens, for obvious reasons. But on that day, sat in a sea of Man United fans who'd all been on the drink all day, with me stupid bloody blue flag and my blue and white kit, bawling my eyes out because I just seen my team get battered while getting abused by 20,000 Man United fans. Wasn't the most positive experience. But at least we had the last laugh because we went on to win the title that season. And then I'd say my most positive memory of that year was sitting in my dad's living room in Oswestwhistle, watching him. Do you remember the old sky boxes where all buttons were along the front and you didn't have a remote, you had to press the button? And it was my dad running from one end of the living room to the other to switch between the Rovers game at Liverpool and the Man United West Ham game to see what the score was. In between. And then obviously we went on to win the league. So they're my earliest football memories, I'd say.
That's a very good start to a football memory, definitely. I was born in 93, so I missed the Premier League winning years. But obviously, my first season that I fully remember was promotion back to the Premier League in 2001, like the Matt Jansen at Deepdale season. That was my first memory, or like earliest strong memories that I can remember. And then obviously I had the
that season was my best. That was I got a season ticket the year after we got relegated. And that season when we got promoted, there's still, no matter what we've seen in the years after going back up, that's the best season I've ever had watching Rovers. It was fantastic that season in the first division when we became second, didn't we?
Yeah. We
had such a good team.
Like I had the Premiers after that, Europe, went into Cup final. Lewis was obviously born just after that and missed.
Yeah, I think seriously, your two first seasons are comfortably better than mine. I mean, mine was like, the first game I can actually remember was in 9-10, beat Peterborough in the Cup 5-2. I mean, we had a decent cup run that season, got to the semi-final against Villa, and I think we finished 10th under Big Sam. So it was like a decent-ish season on the whole, but nowhere near as good as winning the league and winning promotion back to the Premier League.
Richard, I'm not. I don't know that's a word, but are you a massive football fan? I know you've got a lot of hobbies, a lot of interests. I can tell by your Twitter and.
I think football is less of a hobby of mine now. It would be fair to say, or less of an interest of mine now. But that's not to say I don't take an interest. But my earliest memory is my dad taking me to, and I'm pretty sure it would have been in the Riverside stand. I can kind of feel and I see bits of it still. And I think it was in 1973, and it was against Plymouth, and it either made sure that we were promoted from Division 3 or we'd won the championship from Division 3. I can't remember. That's my earliest memory. Were you saying best memories as well?
You can do best and worst are on there. So
the best memory was being at Anfield when we won the title, and I was working at the time for the Evening Telegraph, for the Lancashire Telegraph at the time, and I was given the brief of going and writing a colour piece, just a general an atmosphere piece, not a sports writing piece, an atmosphere piece, kind of a fans view item. But the only tickets we could get were in Liverpool seats, and that was just fine, absolutely fine. I was going nuts, and nobody cared. Nobody cared. So there's my first and best would be those two. But there are other good ones. Full Members Cup final. I'm old enough to have been at that. That was a great day out, but I'm also old enough to have been on the terraces at Crystal Palace when we just missed our club promotion. I think it was 89. That I think somewhere thereabouts.
Yeah.
And 80s and 90s, back into the 70s, 80s and the 90s. I loved. Things changed for me a little bit, if I'm being honest, when Sam Allardyce became the manager, and I just went, oh, God. Because when I was writing about football, as I did for a few years for the Independent, I saw a lot of Bolton Wanderers, and they had some great players, and it was really still quite a dreamy lot at the time. Anyway, slightly different tale. This isn't about Sam Allardyce, it's about something else.
We'll get onto this, and we spoke a lot about it last week. I don't know if you heard back the podcast from last week. We spoke a lot about how football's changed from when Sam was a player to nowadays, and if people enjoy it as much. I almost feel like I'm getting towards that bit where I don't enjoy football that much. I try to watch as much as I can, try to go to Rovers as much as I can, but it's getting to the point now where the 2 hours of football is the worst part of the day. So, and we'll get on to the character.
Do you not think though the best music that you've still got in your head that you really like listening to is like sort of age 14 to 18? And is that not the best period of watching football?
Yeah.
Well, actually, if I'm being honest, football's slightly different. I'd say my early 20s because I had no kids, but I had a car and I could go to loads of away matches as well as home matches.
I do know what you mean. There is definitely what we call a nostalgia tax, my music playlist is Oasis, Pulp, Blur, it's just 90s and then mid-noughties indie rock all the way through. 14 and 15, how old would I have been? And that's when Allardyce first came in, so that were the years where I probably didn't enjoy it as much. This is going to sound mad. My favourite years was the first season of the Championship under Keane. I went to 43 out of the 46 games. I think I'd just turned 19, 20, so it was
Yeah, that's probably the best age of going on away days and following Rovers all over the country when you're young, but you haven't got any and you haven't got any real responsibility.
Yeah.
Age, really.
Why do I have a responsibility now?
It's probably the best time in it, to go to away games and enjoy yourself.
Yeah. Got a couple more quickfire questions. So first match you remember we've kind of really touched on. Your favourite all-time player?
I struggle with this one because I've got a couple. Colin Hendry.
good friend of ours, drinks in the local down the road from me, plays bingo on a Sunday.
I think I'd have to say Simon Garner, but massive soft spots for Stuart Metcalf from when I was tiny. When I was really, really young. Duncan McKenzie, when he came to Blackburn Rovers, that was awesome. But Shearer Sutton as well, and obviously some great players of that era. But I think, I quite enjoyed watching football back into the 80s. There were some awful bits about football at that time. But I quite enjoyed going with my mates, or my granddad used to go with as well. So I'm quite fond of that era when we were knocking on the door without ever quite pushing it open.
Yeah, definitely. Right, so we'll get onto the book now. So I'm going to start with you, Dan. A couple of questions. How did it come about? Talk us through the process. When did the first DM, email, letter pop through? Wow.
So it was Richard contacted me via LinkedIn of all mediums. I was looking this up not long ago. It was February 2021.
Is it really?
Yeah. Just saying, I've got a project in mind, and your name's been mentioned. So that was, I knew of Richard, but we'd never met or worked together. So it was intriguing, and then we had a conversation, didn't we? And you introduced the concept, which I was obviously, as a Rovers fan and a writer, I was quite excited and keen to get involved. And so one of those things where it's sort of suggested, and then you think, well, I really hope this doesn't go bloody tits up now. And then we had a chat with, we sort of had a think about it, said, yeah, let's crack on. And we had a Zoom chat with the three of us, including Simon, didn't we? And that was really good, just to see what the chemistry was like. And we sort of had a laugh, and then we agreed to, using the original book as source material, look at redoing one chapter, just see how it worked out. So that's what we did. So we picked a random chapter out of thin air, which was the Bobby Saxton era, which I think is Simon's best time at Blackburn, certainly. And had a good long chat with Simon, expanded on the chapter, changed some bits of it, and then it came out okay. And then we had a further conversation, decided to crack on and do the whole book, didn't we?
Yeah, mostly you corrected my poor grammar from the original book, so that was quite helpful. And then I uncorrected it in a proof recently. So yeah, it was quite straightforward. Who did I speak to? Was it Andy Neal? I think it was Andy Neal.
Yeah. Which is the Telegraph connection. Yeah.
Yeah, we've all spent time at the Telegraph, and Dan came recommended. So yeah, I enjoyed that part of the process.
Yeah. When did you first get the idea to redo the book? Did you just, I know you spoke about being a 20th anniversary of the first book. Was that always the idea, or was there just like a one day, I'm going to write another book?
No, it was the first spark was probably about 10 or 12 years, I can't remember, 10 years ago maybe. Another publisher came to us and said they'd like to republish the book. But I said to Simon, I think we should turn this down, because why don't we wait for an opportunity to have another go, a different way of doing it. And it wasn't like there were going to be any money in it at all. So you can actually still see that. It's advertised on Amazon. It never got into public, it was never allowed to be published. But they did decide that they really fancied it.
Is that why when you Google it, there's a random cover artwork that isn't the one? I wondered where they...
It might not be on Amazon. Yeah, it might be when you Google it. Yeah. It's weird. It's
there's
really
like a
weird.
funny picture that it's like, that's not the cover of the book. Where's that?
Yeah. But anyway, but I always thought there was because when I did it first time round, I had, what I really wanted was to do what Dan's done second time round, which is to get other people talking about Simon and the eras in which they're connected, and to tell a story, tell us a story that they remember that Simon doesn't. So I had that idea at the start, but I just didn't get that far with it. So that was part of, the first time we spoke, me and Dan and Simon, we must have been drinking some strong cups of tea or something, because we were talking about all sorts of things. At one point, I think I said, "Oh, why don't we do a dot-to-dot Simon Garner in the middle of the book or something?"
There were all sorts of ideas, yeah.
But I always felt there was an opportunity to come back to it. But what it meant, it had to be looked at by a different set of eyes. Couldn't be me doing it again. I didn't really want to do it again. I really fancied it to be done with different eyes. Use the first book as a starting point, because the material in there, I still think it's a great read for anybody who's not got the original. Buy the original as well. But it all needed bolstering. Every era needed something new. There was always another story. And don't tell anybody, but we learnt a couple more in the last 2 weeks that would be great for the book. Great. But it's too big and late. He didn't remember.
We have to wait for book 3 now, aren't we?
Yeah, book 3. So, so it was about that. And also, we needed to bring Simon's story up to date, tell the story of his testimonial, tell the story of what came after that, rebuild the front end of it. There's an awful lot. There's twice as many words. Did you realise that, Dan? It's twice as many words. It's a proper. I'm sorry. It's a proper read now. Thanks to Dan.
We've got to get out this door at the end of this conversation.
Question to both of you, really. Do you think the amount of time between the 2 books allowed Simon to perhaps see things differently, reassess a few things?
Absolutely, Lewis.
The first one.
I'll tell you some of the things.
He was not long retired, and now I suppose that it's been 20 years. You see, he'll see things a bit differently.
It made for a challenging couple of things. I'll be honest, I can't actually remember the specific stories now, but I remember him recounting certain things that when you cross-referenced them with the previous book, they were like, hang on, that's not what you said 20 years ago. And you're like, was that Richard's artistic license in book 1? Or has Simon just remembered it a bit differently this time? And I think you're right, that because we've had this conversation, haven't we, Richard, where when the first book came out, he'd just finished playing, he'd retired from his non-league career in 2000, and then the book came out 2 years later or something. 20 years have passed now, so he's possibly a bit less. He may have withheld some things a bit more than, or the detail behind certain things back then, which maybe he didn't want to talk about, which by now, the passage of time, he's like, whatever. So yeah, there are things. It did make me smile at times, because I'm sort of talking to him, and then, this isn't what you said 20 years ago, Simon, but... So definitely.
Yeah.
So that's part of the change. But what else is attitude? No, he's still who he is, isn't he? He's he still reads. When I read it this time, it was like reading it for the first time, the Dan version, and it felt like he was still talking to me. It was. Yeah. He tells a good tale, the Simon, if he remembers it.
And I guess what's interesting is, obviously, so in the new book, we've got because in the original book, the first chapter is, I was born in Boston, etc. But we've inserted a new first chapter which talks about Simon's views on football and just, it's not part of the timeline. It's just a bit of a reflective chapter. If you'd done that in the first book, that would be completely different now, because the world has changed so much in those 20 years. Because he talks about being a footballer nowadays compared to then, and how you couldn't just walk into the pub because everyone in there would have the phone out. But 20 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case, would it? As much.
Yeah. I don't think he, from reading it, from talking to him, I don't think he regrets not being part of that scene. No. Because it must be awful.
Yeah.
It wouldn't have suited the way they used to live their lives. Was very different.
Yeah, I think the relationship that he had with the fans, we spoke about it a lot last week, and I'll trip over my words another time. And he said he couldn't have that nowadays, because I think there's a lack of trust now between players and fans. That there is a lot of trying to catch you out, whether it be with mobile phones or with what you've said, or it only takes one story from the paper, and it can. I watched a podcast this week with Henry Lansbury, and he said it only takes one person to ruin your life in football. And I think there's so many more people now that are willing to almost try that for you, whereas back maybe 20 years ago there were a lot more respect and a lot more people that were willing to help you rather than drag you down.
I think that's true, but there's a good story in the book about there's a couple of these kinds of stories, but one about a journalist who really just didn't check the stories and was talking about a big fight at the Garner family home and windows being smashed. And the truth is so much simpler. So they weren't entirely immune. Even back in the 80s, Simon caught a bit of weird press that made no sense, really.
Yeah.
But you didn't have people in a bar spiking your drink and videoing you.
Yeah. You mentioned then about the things in this book that you might have wanted to do back when you wrote the first book. Was the process tougher back then? Now I'm sure you've done a lot of the calls over Teams, and I'm guessing from the other people, like the guest appearances you got in the book, you've done that over technology rather than meeting in person, letters back and forth. Was it, I don't want to say miles away back then, but was it such a harder process back then than it is now?
Yeah, simply. I did it on the landline telephone. I had a little suction cap that went on the back of the landline phone. That plugged into a cassette recorder.
What's one I have?
For younger listeners, that plugged into a cassette recorder. I then gave the cassette to somebody to transcribe it for me, and then that gave me the raw material to type up. There was I did have a what do they call it? A word processor at the time. It was a basic PC, but that got nicked. That was quite interesting. It got nicked when we were 4 chapters in. Now, don't tell anybody, right? But I've exploited that for publicity purposes, and told them, like, reading the Telegraph, my laptop's been nicked. It's got the first 4 chapters of Simon Garner's book on it. That was all true, but I did have backups, obviously. So we cracked on. Yeah, so it was floppy disks as well. And again, congratulations to any viewer who can remember one of those. So the process, is a lot easier now, but that's literally the easiest bit of it. It's not the easiest bit of it. Interviewing people is not easy, but it's the tech isn't the important bit. It's what comes next, which is the magic in Dan's fingers. You like that one?
Yeah, I think what I would say is, because obviously I've written this entire book without leaving my house. Every single interview has been done virtually. The fact that the whole project started in the middle of the pandemic, so that it was necessary at first. But in a way, it's kind of sad because, I had, before we'd started the book, I've spoken to Simon Garner 2 or 3 times when I was at the Lancashire Telegraph. And then obviously we did this. I don't know if he remembers that, probably doesn't. So I've never actually met him in the flesh. Funnily enough, I've never met Richard in the flesh. We've had lots of conversations over the phone and virtually, just because that's how the whole thing started. And then once we were in a rhythm, you just carried on. But obviously when you started the first book, you went and met him, didn't you, at his house, and possibly had 1 or 2 drinks.
Possibly had 1 or 2 drinks, yeah. I decided, what did I want to interview? Oh, I know what it was. So I went down on the train, and on the train I read this book about a footballer called Gavin Friday. It's just a brilliant football book about, I think he was a 70s hero for Reading, the kind of footballer you'd love to spend time with, as long as there were no mobile phones around. But I went down to see him, and the idea was to go to the pub, have a few drinks with Simon Garner, and tape a chapter's worth with him. And what the story I wanted to do was the day Blackburn Rovers won the Premier League title. That's the story I wanted to do with him. And not a single sentence of that recording was usable. I was absolutely hammered. Absolutely. We've made 2 of us, or I don't know, there were probably 10 of us drinking by this point. But it was a really good way of getting to know him, because we started sober, so I remembered that bit. We got a bit drunk, I remember that bit, and we got really drunk, and I don't remember much about that at all. And yeah, so that was a good way to do it. And then we did it all over the phone after that. I didn't do another face-to-face with him.
And then going back to the technology, what's fun, obviously, a lot of people can use Teams, so you can sit and you can see the face. Simon's not the most technologically advanced. He's certainly a man of his generation. So,
oh God, how many stereotypes you're rolling out there?
So I would basically sit at my laptop with Teams on record and him on speakerphone. So basically using my laptop as essentially just a recording device to pick up the conversation on the phone. We have actually converted him recently. We've managed to finally get him into, he can use it now because he's obviously handy for this stuff. But one of those interviews, like I had to do similar, because a lot of these people I spoke to struggled with the technology. And one of the interviews is with a guy called Gordon Bartlett, who was the Wheelstone manager who signed Simon. And for whatever reason, I ended up having to do the interview in the same way as Simon with the phone here. And what I didn't realise at the time was that Teams had updated, and I don't know if it was a new feature, but they've introduced something called noise suppression. So if your dog barks or the doorbell goes, the person on the other end can't hear it, they can just hear your voice. But what that meant was that my recording of the interview with Gordon Bartlett was just me asking questions and then silence. So I didn't get any. So I had to, and then as soon as I realised this almost immediately after the conversation, so then I had to really quickly write up his chapter from memory and then send it to him and say, I'm hoping this is right. And it turned out okay, but technology let me down on that occasion.
Cassettes and floppy disks, it's the future.
Yeah, I'm going to throw Simon under the bus here. After we ended the recording last Thursday, he was like, oh my God, I'm dying for a wee. How do I close this call down? And we're like, it's a big red button in the top corner. He's like, I'm going to shut the lid.
Yeah. Well, he's just left me before now. He's waited for his missus to come in and turn it off for him.
Yeah. So you got a few guests on the book this time. How was it getting people to come forward? Was it like an open invitation? Did you reach out to people individually? How did it come about?
Yeah, so we basically looked at the people who were around for each. What we wanted to do is intersperse each chapter with somebody that was relevant to the preceding chapter. So it was identifying a player or a manager from each era, and to be honest, it was a mixture of finding them on Twitter. For example, Mick Rathbone, just send him a DM and there he is, absolute legend, that man. Bobby Saxton, I found his son on LinkedIn and sent him a message, and we got him. He's all very varied different ways. I mean, local newspaper journalists were very useful. There was a chap in the Midlands who was able to give me Ozzy Ardiles' number for the West Brom connection.
That's the right response, Rob.
That was a pinch.
I've got a Midlands journalist who's going to pass me on Ozzy Ardiles' phone number. I mean, that is the most random sentence I've ever heard in my life.
Brilliant. Yeah, it's because of the West Brom kit. But I mean, that was speaking to Ozzy Ardiles. Like, not only did he win the World Cup, but he was in a film with Sylvester Stallone. So, Martin O'Neill was a good one because
that's incredible.
Because of Simon's Wickham connection. Have you heard the commentator Alan Parry? He's a massive Wickham fan, and him and Simon are quite good friends because of Simon playing there.
Yeah.
So I got Alan Parry's number via another journalist. I can't remember who it was, and then I spoke to Alan Parry. I said, "I'm really after Martin O'Neill. Can you help me?" And he said, you won't get him because he never replies to anything. He said, but best thing to do is email him. So he gave me an email address, and I emailed it. And then weeks went by, and then one day I got a phone call from Martin O'Neill. That was like, wow. which I think is a real thing for the way he feels about Simon, for him to, because he could have just ignored that and said, "Oh, I'm not interested," but he didn't, and he obviously thinks highly enough of Simon to ring some random lad from Blackburn.
My heart would have stopped
to do a
if I answered the phone and they said it's Martin O'Neill. I'd have just frozen.
Oh, it was like that. I mean, one really annoying one is I spoke to Howard Wilkinson, because Howard Wilkinson was the manager of Boston when Simon was a 16-year-old lad. But Howard Wilkinson remembered nothing except for, "Oh yeah, I know he played for me," but apart from that, so I didn't end up featuring in the book, but I did speak to him.
Can't make a chapter out of that.
Yeah. But Martin O'Neill was really good. I've said this before. So we had a long conversation and wrote it up, and then what I was doing was I'd interview them, write up what I was suggesting would go in the book, and then sending it to them for approval. And I sent it to Martin O'Neill, and he said, "Oh, I do have some tweaks." I was like, "Right, okay." And then weeks and weeks went by, and then I'd chase him up on a text message, and then weeks and weeks go by, and then he'd reply, and he'd say, "Oh, I do have some changes I want to make," and this happened. And it must have been 12 months between the interview and him finally coming back and saying, "I'm going to do that tomorrow." And then he hand wrote, and he just basically, obviously looked at what I'd wrote, thought, "That's rubbish. I'm going to do it myself." So he literally hand wrote. There was sort of 7 or 8 pages handwritten, and he took photographs of it, which is what we're talking about in terms of people with technology, and took photographs and then WhatsApped them to me, and then I had to type it all up. So everything that Martin O'Neill's words in the book were handwritten by Martin O'Neill for the book.
And they are, you can tell there is a slightly different style about it. Because
it reads very
for
different
obvious reasons, but it couldn't be changed, could it? It's not the style. It's not written the same written style as the rest of the book, but it's magnificent. I love it. That's it. That little chapter. My oh wow moment was when I wrote to Kenny Dalglish to see if he'd write the foreword to the first book, and I was freelancing somewhere. I was freelancing for a car company one afternoon. Oh, my phone went, and said, "Yeah, Celtic FC, I have Kenny Dalglish for you." Oh, you're all right. "Hi, Richard, it's Kenny Dalglish." I'm not even going to try the accent. Kenny Dalglish, and I'm now shaking. So I'm hurriedly writing everything down that I'm trying to write. Basically, what I would have liked to have done would have been 10 of them, but I thought Dan would be better at it, so it was worth waiting 20 years. But so Kenny gives me this thing, and I said, "Right, that's brilliant. Thanks very much. Do you want to see it before it's published?" "Yeah, no, it'll be fine." And that was it. It was lovely. The next time I saw him was at his testimonial.
Wow.
It was a moment.
Yeah. Did you have any help from Rovers or any of the other clubs Simon played for directly, Dan, or was it just all your own digging like you've just been through?
No.
No, but to be fair, so my version, I had loads of reference books. So I had a bunch of books that were by my side constantly as I was going through it. And you did the same, didn't you, Dan? We research things in the best ways we can. You don't always need. I'm not sure how much the club would have offered, really. Any of the clubs, they might have had some nice things to say, but it's his story, isn't it? That's the main thing. Is his story interspersed by some memories, several of which seem to involve stories about running at Pleasanton for strange reasons.
Yeah.
I mean that's good for the lads who play Sunday League in Blackburn to say that they're playing on the same pitches as Simon Garner once trained on.
Well, they played on the same pitches that Alan Shearer and Kenny Dalglish were on when they first. That's when Kenny Dalglish first came and they signed Alan Shearer. They were still training there, weren't they? It was a year or two before they built Brockhall.
I went down. I skived an hour off work one day, and I went down to Pleasanton just to go and watch Kenny Dalglish play five-a-side.
So I'm going to go on to like football now and the material that we're currently releasing. Do you think demand for this has changed over the last 20 years from the first book to now because of how football is now? And that's a very open question. Probably not worded the best, but I'm going to push you for an answer.
Yeah, I'm not sure that. I think demand for something like this is more rooted in football nostalgia, which possibly might be a bit down to football now possibly has lost its appeal a little bit. It's much more. Football now reminds me a bit like WWE. It's very much like certainly at the top end, it's like a franchise, isn't it? It's an entertainment business with millions and millions of pounds. Whereas people who were around at the time remember the football of the 80s and the 90s being, I mean, like you said, Richard, there were some horrible times for football in that era, but also it was a proper leveler, wasn't it? It wasn't ruled by money the way it is now. And then also I feel like, I mean, I'm a Blackburn fan that, like I say, I was born in the late 80s, and very privileged to grow up with a team that was, when I was 4, Jack Walker bought the club, and so I never experienced the club that Simon played in that could barely pay the wages, couldn't turn the lights on. But I have always been very interested in the history of the club, so I've read all the books and stuff and learned about, the 3 FA Cups in the 1890s, whenever it was, the Bob Crompton, Fergus Suter, all that sort of stuff. So I've read back, and I think I like to think you've still got that. So you've got younger people like myself who never saw Simon, who are interested in reading about football in those days. Fingers crossed, anyway, that some people like that buy the book.
And what about you, Richard?
No, I think that's a good perspective. I hadn't really thought about it. It's a good question. So I suppose when the first time round, it was more of a career just over, a reflection on a career, and it was and it wasn't. We weren't in the nostalgia period. I suppose we were. But we're only 10 or 15 years back on from that at that point. Only 10. I say only. Yeah, it was 10 years since Simon played for Blackburn Rovers when the book came out. Demand for it, I don't know. It's difficult to say. It's the online shop's very busy, and we're getting a lot of interesting requests for signings and for shops that want to stock that wasn't expecting. I think Dan's probably right. I think there is. It is a story in the main of football in a different time, told from Simon Garner's eyes. But I think it is a story of an age of football as well. So I think anybody who's interested in, just a different kind of football. I hadn't thought that WWE reference there, Dan. That's interesting. I find Premier League football a bit tiresome, but I find a lot of football a bit tiresome, to be honest. So I'm not the best person to ask.
I think the contrast in how different football is today to how it used to be has created a demand for stories from the older players.
Yeah.
Just the kind of antics that they used to get up to off the field. I feel like players today, because of how it has changed, if they go in the pub with the fans or on social media, they can't really enjoy themselves away from the pitch. So I feel like that's created a demand for things Under the Cosh is very popular. I don't know if you watch or listen to that. I feel like that's. I think it's the contrast in modern to older football of yesteryear that's created that demand.
Yeah. It's reflected in a number of these things that are coming out, isn't it? Sort of Mark Patterson did one recently, and Mick Rathbone's done a couple.
They've been great,
yeah, and they're all really interesting reads certainly for, I'd say, and I don't want to sound ageist, Richard, but people like us three who, like I said, we've only known Rovers as a fancy club with big fancy stadium and Premier League football and this and that. We didn't see those days of struggle. So when you read about it, it's like, wow, must have been. I mean, I wish I could go in a time machine and stand on the terraces at Ewood. I mean, I might. Once I got there, I might think, God, I wish I was back home. But
it just smelled like a bad pub by the gents' toilets mostly.
And that it leads me on to my next question. So, obviously, you're fresh off writing a book we all can't wait to read. Can you see this content dying out with current players that are playing at the minute. I mean, like the players that you've got in the book, like the people you've got in the book, they are massive, massive characters. Like, and you just mentioned about the handwritten notes by Martin O'Neill. If you could get hold of them, I'll make you a private offer. There's people on the Scottish side of our family that would pay a lot of money just to have handwritten notes by someone of that aura. And again, like people like Kenny Dalglish. Can you see 30, 40 years from now people writing about the current generation and having anywhere sort the amount of personalities that you've got in this book?
Well, I think aside from most of the people in the top 2 divisions of English football now getting to an age where when they finish their career, they probably think, well, it's not really worth writing a book because, part of it is about, you do it to make money, don't you? And if you're earning 130 grand a week and you finish your career, you're not gonna worry about writing a book unless you are, that way inclined and it's not about the money. But also, I don't think the stories will be there. Like some of the stories that Simon tells about life in football in the 80s and 90s, I don't think it's like that now. I mean, you'll still get the odd character, but it's all behind closed doors, isn't it? And I don't think they get away with a quarter of what Simon and the boys used to. From some of the stories are fantastic, aren't they? I mean, I can't imagine Alfie Haaland, not Alfie Haaland, his son, being buried on the beach in Benidorm, having a lot of cigarettes shoved in his face, and then being shouted by his manager to go and play a match against a team of Benidorm waiters. You know what I mean? That's just a little teaser for something that's coming up in the book.
I suppose the most old-fashioned, if you will, player we see today is probably like Jack Grealish in terms of like how he goes out and enjoys himself and how we all see that.
He publicly enjoys himself, doesn't he? I mean, they all, yeah.
So, but apart, I feel like he's definitely like a character. Like you can see what he's about. He comes across as a very down to earth, normal lad that's just living most lads' dream. So. But apart from that, I feel
they're boring, aren't they? They're boring.
Very sensitive.
It's when they're interviewed, they're boring because the media trained to within a millimetre of their life for some very good reasons, legal reasons as well as media reasons. But they will not divert from the topic of football. There's only one thing. Interviews need to be a little bit different. The personalities will come out, and it's all on YouTube. You'd be readily dig out what this kind of stuff I mean, but it's just mostly quite dreary.
Yeah, definitely. I've got one final question about the book. So, and this is it'll be like a 2-parter for both of you, really. So, Dan, I'm going to ask you first. So, what's the feeling like of that final Yes release? Now, I know you probably had 4 or 5 final releases. I'm guessing there wasn't just one. But as someone who gets nervous or anxious when they finally press that submit button and it's out there for the world to see, how like an opportunity like this, how big was that moment where you finally said yes, take it?
It was. It's funny because I don't think it's actually hit me at this point, because I know we did it, didn't we, Rich? And I finished it, sent it to Richard, and he sort of said, "Let it go now." And then he rang me up, and he said, "Congratulations, you've written a book." And I think it still hasn't hit me until I get my hands on a copy. I think I'm still going to feel like I can add to it, like we were bloody. You said before, didn't you? Every time he opens his gob, he tells someone a new story. He went on. I'd finished the book, and then we put him on Under the Cosh, and he told 3 stories that weren't in the book. So I was like, for God's sake. So I'm like, right, I need to add these stories in. And then the other week he spoke to Andy Bays on Radio Lancashire, and he talked about how he went in goal against Ipswich. And I was like, I didn't know that.
I knew that. I'm sorry.
Richard was there and didn't tell us. So that's missing from the book. But yeah, I know what you're saying, Rob. But I feel like it hasn't hit me until I see it.
So was it just one push, and then it wasn't like you uploaded or you sent it to Richard, and Richard went, "Oh yeah, that's a good first draft,"
no,
and you were like,
first draft,
what?
Yeah, there's been a first draft. I think there was 3 or 4 drafts, and then it went to the printers, and then we got the sample copy, and then there was a slight tweak from that, and then that's gone. Yeah.
Found it.
Yeah, I can't spell Kevin Gallagher's name. That's why.
It was Garner I was thinking of as well. Oh, that was earlier draft.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, we had on the very last minute picked up a Nanny Grainer instead of Nanny Garner. That's Simon's nanny.
But there was because right at the end it became not a rush. It became deadline. It was what I like, and Dan and I love working to tight deadlines. It's what we do, and at the end it was great because we were getting the design done, the cover design that was quite complex. That was getting the image rights for certain things. Not easy to get photograph rights for Simon Garner. By golly, we've got a couple of absolute bangers in there, haven't we? That Clive Lawrence is one of the great photographers in this area. Took some shots of Simon when Clive was a student, and he gave us a set of those. So there's a couple of those that made the book. But there was all that design process that was ongoing, and simultaneously with that there was last minute revisions to the text, there was like little tweaks, and we then even when we did all that, Dan read the first half of the book, I read the second half of the book, and then I read the first half of the book, and there were again a bunch of tweaks. But every change that we made, apart from my obvious ones, I think we jointly approved almost all of them, didn't we? So it was like it was a good two-way edit process. But I did enjoy that process, but it was blooming quick at the end to meet the deadlines for the print.
Yeah.
But anyway, you have written a book. I shouldn't keep telling you this, but you have written a book, and it's a good one.
Yeah.
Obviously, individuals like Simon, few and far between. He's up there with Rovers' greatest legends ever. He's the all-time leading goal scorer. Would either of you consider writing another book with another player in the future? I know David Dunner is probably like the most recent kind of individual you can compare with Garner. Spent a lot of his career at Rovers. Big Rovers fan. I remember him saying a few years ago it's something that he might look at doing at some point. Would you be up for doing it again in the future with another player?
100%. I'd love to. I'd want Richard to publish it, but he might not. I think the issue you've got with high-profile players like Dunny, or that he will know top national journalists that would probably pick something like that up. So I'm probably looking at your more niche people like Simon Garner.
I'll tell you a story I'd read, Dan. I'd read Mark Atkins' story.
Yeah. He's a really nice bloke, Mark Atkins, and he's so down to earth. He's done a chapter in the book.
Yeah, I think I've seen some of the snippets on Twitter, and a really good player as well, a really underrated player for Rovers.
You're not kidding. Absolutely.
Well, that's it. The people who look back at Rovers winning the league in '95, who aren't Blackburn fans, they will tell you that midfield was Tim Sherwood and David Batty, won't they? But David Batty was injured for 3/4 of the season, wasn't he? It was Mark Atkins.
And look at the results after Batty came back and replaced Atkins. That's also quite interesting. I'm not saying it's I'm playing football.
Yeah, we did drop a few points, didn't it, towards the end?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all my questions about the book. Lewis, have you got any more questions?
No. You done?
So it is open floor, ready to push the book, the release, when can we expect it? I know Richard, you've got a copy there, so
I've got a sample copy. So this was our final proof, and there were some changes. We changed the pictures in the middle, actually, at the last minute. I think we changed one other little detail. So I've got that. It's at the printer now, and it's due. They've got to go to Simon first to sign, and then they come from Simon up north, and then they get mailed out. And I think the mailing's from the middle of next week, possibly Wednesday, Thursday next week, so, hopefully. So I'm hoping to get them into Simon's hands to sign on Tuesday.
And they're available from www.simongarnerbook.co.uk. And are we hoping to have some other outlets available?
We are hoping to have some other outlets. We're just in final discussions with 2 fabulous establishments in your locality.
Good stuff.
And more coming. We're hoping to do. He's hoping to do some Q&As, signings in the new year, not before the new year, not before Christmas, but in the new year. We'll be looking to get Simon up north, shake a few hands, sign a few mubs.
Needs his break from all the podcasting first.
Yeah, we're giving him a well-earned Christmas break. He's done it. He's done two interviews a week in the evening for about the last 3 or 4 weeks, possibly 5 weeks, and he's doing the same this week and next week. And that takes away valuable pub time, doesn't it?
He does.
That's the first thing he said when he joined us last week.
You kept me out of the pub.
You dragged me out of the pub tonight for this.
And that is true. Yeah.
And that was one other question I forgot to ask. Like you just mentioned, coming up north, hopefully to do some Q&As, book signings. Anything involved with a club? Are you going to be at matches, like any events at Ewood where you potentially do book signings and stuff?
Hopefully, yeah.
Hopefully,
yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a few. It's just a big admin job to do it, and we haven't started doing that admin job yet. But it is planned for the new year, and there's a lot of interest. So I'm imagining that is a very much a likelihood.
Yeah, good.
It should be in the Rovers store pretty soon. The book.
Yeah. Okie dokie. So if that's all for the questions, then all I've got to say is thank you very much for joining us. I hope the release goes well over the next month. Can't wait for our copy to come through. I don't know who controls the signings. Is it just a Simon Garner autograph? Is there potential for a message to the podcast?
Well, we've had an instruction on that, haven't we, Dan, from our marketing wizard, who says what our official answer at that point is to say, bring your signed copy to a signing, and he will put the dedication in for you there.
Perfect. That's perfect.
How's that?
Thank you very much. So,
my absolute pleasure.
Bye from me.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Thank you very much. It's been fun, Lewis. Lovely to meet you. And also, Rob, it's been great fun. Dan, cheers as always.
See you in a bit.
Okay.
All right. See you in a bit.